Red 2 standing by, all 4 lit, and in the green, welcome back to Goldeneye. We are moving on to the second mission in the game, the facility. We will also be taking in a lesson on James Bond, the literary incarnation. It's actually very interesting comparing the Bond from the books with the Bond from the movies, because we have a very different character to, say, the charisma of Sean Connery, the charm of Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton's more brooding take, which would later be followed by Daniel Craig, the sort of amalgamation Pierce Brosnan has, and Lazenby's little mix of essentially being Connery but with a more human side. So we will, of course, get the information on James Bond as Ian Fleming wrote him. We will also go through Agent, Secret Agent, and 00 Agent, and then go for one of the toughest cheats in the game, but one of the best. So, we'll start out on Agent. So, you will note that we do eventually need another objective in this, which is to collect the door decoder from Dr. Doak. Just bear with me a moment. If we select Secret Agent, contact 00 Agent, that's Dr. Doak. It is worth noting, Dr. Doak is based on Rare developer David Doak, who actually has a PhD in biochemistry. So that was a really, really good little reference along the way. Very, very creative. So, the facility. Inside the chemical weapons facility, you should quickly and efficiently proceed to the bottling area and place demolition charges on the main gas tanks. Political considerations demand that collateral damage is minimized on this mission. Non-military personnel should be disregarded, so don't shoot any scientists. Briefing. You'll be working with 006 on this assignment. The bottling room is the rendezvous point. Don't forget to contact our double agent scientist before you leave and warn him to get out. He will provide you with a decoder for the final security door. There are no women or casinos for 1,000 miles, 007, so even you will be able to concentrate on this mission. Now listen carefully, Bond. Those bombs will be armed as soon as the last one is set. Don't be too close when you set them off or you'll go up in flames as well. And while you're at it, please try and bring back that door opener undamaged for once. Too much rough handling like the last mission and it might go wrong at a bad time. Honestly, 007, sometimes I think you damage your equipment on purpose. Those chemicals could prove to be a match even for your pheromones, James. Don't take too many risks. Let's get going with the lesson. The following information has been sourced from the various official James Bond novels written by Ian Fleming, Kingsley Amis, John Gardner, Raymond Benson, Anthony Horowitz, Sebastian Faulks, Jeffrey Deaver, and William Boyd. In addition, I have taken some details from Sean Egan's book, James Bond: The Secret History, just to make sure everything matches up. Please do actually read these books because there's quite a lot of information to take in, and you'll certainly learn a lot more after I've laid out all the basics for you. Without further ado, let's get going on the lesson for today. Most of us at least know who James Bond is. While I have no official source for this, it was once estimated that at least a quarter of the world's population had seen one or more Bond films. The 25 official movies comprise the world's longest running movie franchise, and one of the most successful. The books date back even further than that. This year marks the 70th anniversary, on 13th April, of the publication of Casino Royale, 007's first adventure. Today's lesson will go a bit more in-depth on the man himself as written by Ian Fleming, with some additional references. If time permits, a later episode may cover Bond as presented in the novels of John Gardner and Raymond Benson. I have to admit I've largely stuck with Fleming's Bond since I haven't been able to find all their books. Ian Fleming once observed that James Bond was born 33 years old, referring to how the character was fleshed out and developed over time. Admittedly, this isn't quite true. Despite his meticulous accuracy on many other matters, Fleming occasionally made inadvertent revisions to key details. Casino Royale mentions that Bond is 8 years away from the service's mandatory retirement age of 45, so born 37 years old instead of 33. Common perception afterwards seemed to place Bond's birth as occurring in 1920, as this is the year cited by John Pearson in James Bond: The Authorised Biography, though this work is not considered official canon. Even then, 1920 may not be entirely accurate, as the obituary written when Bond is presumed dead after the denouement of You Only Live Twice heavily implies he was born in 1924. And this isn't even getting into the flexibility afforded to the cinematic 007, though the idea seems to be Bond is perpetually in his mid-30s to early 40s. If we take the events of each book to occur in the year they were published, Bond would be in his early 40s in the last of Fleming's novels should his birth date be set in 1924. It would therefore seem that in John Gardner's first novel, License Renewed, Bond is pushing 60. Yet the only concession to age is a hint of grey in his hair. He looks as fit as ever. Bond's parents, as mentioned in the above obituary, and confirmed in the cinematic realm by Skyfall, were Andrew Bond and Monique Delacroix. Fleming appears to have not acknowledged Bond as having Scottish heritage after observing the filming of Dr. No and coming around to Sean Connery's portrayal. Prior to the novel On Her Majesty's Secret Service, little of Bond's family history was known despite us getting a better idea of the man himself. It is also established in both canons that Bond's parents died in a mountain climbing accident. Interestingly, their deaths but not names are confirmed in what we can call the first cinematic canon, in Goldeneye, that being the Connery to Brosnan era, while the Craig arc confirms their names but not necessarily the manner of death. Nonetheless, it is generally held that James Bond was orphaned prior to his teenage years. Exactly how Bond was raised afterwards is not known in the first cinematic canon, but in Craig's canon the family gamekeeper Kincaid played some hand in caring for him. The literary Bond, meanwhile, was cared for by his Aunt Charmian, who lived at a place called Pet Bottom. Under her care, Bond would follow in his father's footsteps by attending Eton, just as Ian Fleming did, but also spending time at Fettes, considered a Scottish equivalent of Eton and his father's school, but not as fussed with the private school prestige. Bond was asked to leave Eton following an indiscretion with a maid. The incident is never fully explained, though John Pearson's biography states it was actually an unauthorised date with a fellow student's half-sister, rather than anything potentially salacious. Now, curious readers may actually wish to follow Charlie Higson's Young Bond novels, which are set during Bond's school days. They're pretty good reads, very much trying to follow in the vein of the Fleming era and other novels. Bond would find some stability under the tutelage of a man named Hans Oberhauser, with whom he would learn to ski, as we find out in the short story Octopussy, among other things at Kitzbühel in Austria, yet another detail taken from Ian Fleming's life. Additionally, a girlfriend of Ian's during this time there, to whom he was actually engaged, would ultimately give her name to Bond's mother. The engagement was sadly broken off by interference from Fleming's mother, as I mentioned last time. It is said to be during his teenage years that Bond acquired a love of cars, and cars are considered to be his only hobby according to the man himself, though one could consider gambling as a hobby. The literary Bond is actually associated with Bentleys, several of which are just used as his personal transports. In Casino Royale, he owns a 4.5-litre convertible coupe Bentley, painted in battleship grey with an Amherst Villiers supercharger. Interestingly, some of Fleming's cars had Amherst Villiers superchargers. The book says Bond bought this in 1933, which supports him being born in 1916 and 37 years old at the time of the book. In Moonraker, his Bentley is actually a 1930 model, but it's still a 4.5-litre supercharged Bentley. Thunderball sees him with something of a custom model, a Mark II Continental Bentley with a Mark IV's engine and new bodywork from the coach builders at Mulliners. This too is painted in battleship grey. It appears he keeps this Bentley for some time, as it is mentioned during the early parts of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, though different details are mentioned. Bond only drives an Aston Martin once, taking a DB3 from the company car pool in Goldfinger. The novels written by John Gardner would put Bond in a Saab 900 Turbo before bestowing upon him the Bentley Mulsanne Turbo, which is painted, if my memory serves, in British racing green. While the precise details of how this occurred are somewhat flexible due to the variations in the character's age, we do know that Bond joined the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve during World War II and seems to have had some experience with intelligence services. He achieved the rank of Commander, as did his creator, and was also awarded the CMG at some point prior to Casino Royale. He would continue his work in the intelligence world, undertaking a number of dangerous missions which have only fleeting references. Two of these, the assassination of a Japanese cipher expert and later a Norwegian double agent, would see him granted 00 status, the license to kill. Despite having this status, we discover early on in Goldfinger that Bond does not like killing. While he does his best not to have regrets, as such feelings could be fatal, he will generally do it as best he can and forget about it. The literary Bond does have a less spectacular body count than his cinematic counterpart, but both tend to kill in life or death situations. Though he will kill those who bring evil upon the world, very rarely does Bond kill in cold blood. A passage from Anthony Horowitz's official novel Trigger Mortis, appropriately enough set just after Goldfinger, further confirms Bond's thoughts on the matter. His willingness to show mercy, to know when to pull a trigger or not to pull it, borrowing the idea from Skyfall, is ultimately what separates him from his enemies. Even then, the briefing with M in Dr. No mentions he enjoys the 00 status since it brings him the dangerous missions, the ones he enjoys most of all. From Russia with Love mentions that Bond hates being bored. Perhaps it is the gambler in him which enjoys this sense of risk. After all, Bond is put onto the Le Chiffre case in Casino Royale because he is the service's best gambler, and enjoys games like Baccarat and Chemin de Fer. No surprise to learn that Ian Fleming himself enjoys these games. Much of Bond's personal history remains shadowed, barring Pearson's biography of unknown canonicity. We do have a better idea of the man himself and his habits, thanks to Fleming's excellent descriptive work. In Casino Royale, Vesper Lind describes Bond as looking somewhat like Hoagie Carmichael, a comparison he mentally rejects after his friend Rene Mathis informs him of this comment. Interestingly enough, Sean Egan's book, James Bond: The Secret History, which I have referenced for this, assumes Bond reflecting on this is a continuity error. It may be an editor's mistake, but the book also describes Sir Hilary Bray as a geologist, not a genealogist. Bond has a scar on his right cheek, and his black hair has a noticeable comma that he can't quite tame, falling just above his right eye. It's interesting to compare the way Ian Fleming imagined Bond's appearance to the more rugged figure shown in the comic strip adaptations drawn by John McCluskey. Bond would also wind up with a scar on the back of one hand in the form of the Cyrillic letter for SH, marking him as a spy. This was carved in Casino Royale by the man who eliminated Le Chiffre, but had no orders to kill Bond, and doesn't do so because, well, his superiors really should have told him, but he's leaving Bond alive just to spite them. Bond is clearly physically fit, given all the danger he finds himself in, but even he needs some extra training depending on the job. Both times he works with Quarrel, a Cayman Islander living in Jamaica, Bond undergoes hard physical workouts to prepare for important missions. He possesses remarkable durability and willpower, often coming out of his adventures heavily battered. Bond's sexual appetite seems to remain fairly healthy throughout the books, which is surprising given the brutal torture he receives in Casino Royale. One would assume a number of strikes to the groin with a carpet beater would leave a much more severe impact. It's also surprising Bond is so fit, given he smokes and drinks to excess, a lifestyle which would ultimately have a fatal impact upon his creator. Bond's preferred cigarettes are specially made by Morlands of Grosvenor Street, blending Turkish and Balkan tobacco and sporting 3 gold bands. Of course, this was the day where you could actually get away with characters smoking. Interestingly, Roger Moore's Bond seems to prefer cigars. Bond's alcoholic beverages are more varied, though he seems to lean towards whiskey or bourbon compared to his cinematic counterparts' signature martinis. That said, he does have the Vesper Martini in Casino Royale. When Bond does consume vodka, he actually has a habit of putting pepper in it. He explains that when he was at the British Embassy in Moscow, he would do this to ensure the fusel oil used in making cheap vodka was poured to the bottom of the glass, and so you wouldn't get sick from that. Interestingly, he is sent to a health clinic, Shrublands, after a medical check at the beginning of Thunderball. Naturally, his time in there results in him discovering leads into Spectre's scheme, and ultimately he goes back to drinking and smoking a lot anyway. Bond lives in a flat in Chelsea in an unnamed square just off the King's Road. Generally, he looks after himself, taking a ridiculous pleasure, in his own words, in preparing meals to exacting standards. For one, he likes his eggs boiled for 3 1/3 minutes. He admits this as part of being a bachelor. He appears to be something of a gourmet as well, which served as another means of escapism for readers. When Casino Royale was published, England was still in post-war austerity measures. To people for whom the height of cuisine was probably eggs and chips, a reputation England would live down to for decades until the likes of Jamie Oliver arrived, the sumptuous meals Fleming lovingly described were almost as beautiful and desirable as the women Bond seduced. Though for all his love of gourmet food, Fleming himself was apparently terrible at preparing it. His friend Noel Coward claimed he would cross himself before dining with Ian, and on one occasion described some of Ian's culinary handwork as tasting like armpits. Despite Bond's bachelor's knack for personal care, he does actually have a helping hand. While she has not appeared in cinematic canon, a housekeeper named May is employed at his flat. She is a tough and no-nonsense Scottish woman who is not afraid to speak her mind on a number of matters, and Bond very clearly respects her input. May doesn't stand on authority a great deal, only referring to Kings and Winston Churchill as Sir. The latter does see Bond playfully tease her, but she pays Bond a measure of respect by often adding an S sound to the end of sentences. May is one of the few constant presences in Bond's life. He notes towards the end of The Man with the Golden Gun that he doesn't have a lot of male friends, but he treasures those few he has. He often plays golf with Bill Tanner, the Chief of Staff at MI6, and he has a very well-documented friendship with Felix Leiter. The former CIA agent is Bond's most consistent and dependable ally, though not afraid to rib him in a classic display of friendly rivalry between America and England. In Live and Let Die, Felix was mauled by sharks belonging to an agent of villain and smuggler Mr. Big. He survived, but with the loss of a hand and leg, which cost him his CIA career. He does maintain several connections with the agency, however, and serves as a private detective with the Pinkertons agency. This has given him a remarkable degree of flexibility to assist Bond on many occasions. Bond also befriended the aforementioned Quarrel, who assisted him in Live and Let Die and Dr. No. In the latter adventure, Quarrel would meet his end at the hands of an armoured vehicle styled to look like a dragon, complete with flamethrower, while helping Bond infiltrate Dr. No's base at Crab Key. Finally, while he is more of a father figure in many ways, Admiral Sir Miles Messervy, better known as M, plays an important role in Bond's life. M trusts Bond heavily, though he will pull him into line or question behaviours such as Bond's womanising if he needs to. It's very clear Bond looks up to him, and the two seem to have a fairly solid friendship. M calls on Bond's assistance to defuse a potential cheating scandal at his gentleman's club, and that's an actual gentleman's club like the old Athenaeum Club in Melbourne, Australia, not code for a strip joint, and said incident winds up being a catalyst for Bond's investigation into Sir Hugo Drax and the Moonraker project. We also know that Bond is very good friends with M's secretary Moneypenny, though the romantic undertones of the films are not quite as present. They're brought up in John Gardner's books, though. The 00 section has its own secretary, and we shall meet them along with a number of Bond's allies later on. The first is Lelia Lil Ponsonby, the second a very different Mary Goodnight. While we shall also learn more of the women who drift in and out of Bond's life a bit later on, two made a significant impact. His first notable love, Vesper Lind, whose suicide and reveal as a double agent working for the Russians hit Bond quite hard, and his ill-fated bride Tracy DiVincenzo, the only woman to carry the title of Mrs. James Bond, even if only for a tragically brief period of time. While Vesper's death hit Bond hard and perhaps contributed to his womanizing, You Only Live Twice reveals Bond was utterly broken by Tracy's murder at the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. He only cleans himself up from his spiral of drinking and gambling when presented with a seemingly impossible mission to Japan, and by pure chance is able to enact revenge upon her killer, his arch-nemesis Ernst Stavro Blofeld. In the aftermath, Bond loses his memory and is presumed dead. While at first he believes himself to be a Japanese fisherman, the end of the novel sees him preparing to travel to Russia for reasons he cannot remember nor explain. The man with the golden gun reveals he was brainwashed into becoming a Russian agent with orders to assassinate M. Bond fails at this, and is deprogrammed by service neurologist Sir James Maloney before taking on a mission to break an organisation known as The Group, launching a number of sabotage operations across the Caribbean and possibly into America, led by notorious hired killer Francisco Scaramanga, and possibly helped by the KGB with the presence of a Mr. Hendricks. Interestingly, Scaramanga is more of a thug in the book, compared to Sir Christopher Lee's rather suave incarnation. The journey of the literary 007 would ultimately outlive his creator. In 1968, Kingsley Amis, writing under the pseudonym Robert Markham, would continue Bond's adventures with the novel Colonel's Son, a book which actually features a bit more involvement for M. No books were forthcoming for some time as the films took over, though in 1981 John Gardner would be given the official duty of continuing Bond's written adventures. This Bond, as I said, is apparently the same as Fleming's. He is still as fit and durable as ever, although somewhere along the way the idea of Bond being a bit older seems to blur. There are references to Fleming's books, as shown in For Special Services, where Bond reminisces over all the women he's been involved with. But he is ultimately taken on something of an ageless quality, able to adapt to any time and any geopolitical circumstances, as shown in Jeffrey Deaver's novel Carte Blanche. Most authors have maintained the connection to Ian Fleming's Bond, however. Sebastian Falk's Devil May Care is set in the 1960s. Raymond Benson seems to have his books connected to John Gardner's, but again has Bond as something of an ageless figure while still keeping up to date with the changing times. And Anthony Horowitz even included unpublished work of Fleming's in his novel Trigger Mortis, which is set in the middle of Bond's career, while Forever and a Day shows us Bond's mission before Casino Royale, and With a Mind to Kill is actually set towards the end of Bond's career. Interestingly, we finally get some measure of confirmation that James Bond's birthday is in 1924. William Boyd's novel Solo has Bond at 45 years old during its events, and it's set in 1969. To add some additional trivia, the name James Bond was apparently taken from a book Ian Fleming had entitled Birds of the West Indies. The author was an American ornithologist named James Bond, and Fleming did actually get to meet him. He also wound up writing a letter to the ornithologist's wife, apologising for borrowing her husband's name for such a vulgar character, as he would put it, and stated that someday her husband may find a particularly ugly species of bird he may wish to christen Ian Fleming as a means of getting revenge. Next, in regards to Bond's weapons, he is said to sleep with a Colt 38 police positive under his pillow in Casino Royale, though his standard sidearm is the .25 caliber Beretta up until Dr. No, where he is issued with the Walther PPK and a Smith & Wesson Centennial Airweight revolver. That winds up disappearing from the books, possibly because Fleming made a bit of a mistake with that, considering it a weapon for long-range work when it's actually a shorter-range weapon. Interestingly, while the movies tend to show Bond on all these glamorous assignments, both Moonraker and Goldfinger actually show Bond doing paperwork at the office. It's in the former where we meet the 00 Section's first secretary. Bond also states that he looks a bit out of place and alien in England, but that's fine because his work generally doesn't involve being in England. When he's abroad, it's fine and people can assume he's an Englishman. Ironically enough, all of Moonraker does actually take place in England. Something quite fascinating, and perhaps a little bit conceited, is that the obituary in You Only Live Twice mentions that a number of sensationalist novels were written about James Bond's life, and that if they were any more accurate, something would have to be done under the Official Secrets Act. More than likely, this is Ian Fleming taking the piss out of himself, because he did have quite a knack for self-deprecation. Despite Bond's somewhat fastidious tendencies, his cold and often ruthless demeanour, and the harsh reality of a job which has generally kept him from any truly meaningful relationships, he tells Tiffany Case in Diamonds Are Forever he is effectively married to his job, James Bond has remained a fascinating and captivating character, despite the fact The Spy Who Loved Me gives us a very interesting portrait of Bond from somebody else's point of view. On first seeing him, Vivian Michelle actually thinks that Bond is another one of the gangsters who have come to burn down the motel where she's working and leave her as the unfortunate patsy to take the blame. Of course, the hoodlums are also there to do far less pleasant things to her, but even though he looks like one of the gangsters, Bond definitely proves one of the good guys and Vivian winds up falling for it. He is admittedly a product of his time in terms of social attitudes, and this is very clear in Fleming's writing. The books are undoubtedly male fantasies first and foremost, with a number of misogynistic elements. In the case of The Spy Who Loved Me, quite a few of those popped up. Fleming eventually only permitted the title to be used since he was somewhat ashamed of what would be the most experimental Bond novel, but it does have its own distinct themes that do give it some positive elements. Homophobia and racism also rear their heads, displaying the unfortunate societal values of the time. The Germans usually come in for a hiding because there's still very much that hatred from World War II. Koreans are also treated rather harshly, as seen in Goldfinger. This was written when the Korean War was still fresh in people's minds and not associated with wacky medical hijinks. Koreans are actually described as the cruelest people in the world, and Bond always refers to Oddjob as an ape. I do not espouse those beliefs at all. They're pretty terrible. That's putting it lightly. The same novel also shows condescending attitudes towards lesbians. There are also very outdated attitudes and ideas regarding homosexuality in The Man with the Golden Gun. As a mirror of Fleming, Bond did display such attitudes along with being an incarnation of that old British imperialism, that old Rule Britannia etc. stuff. Thankfully, as times changed, especially in the movies, and indeed in the later books, so did Bond's attitudes and beliefs. Such elements must be kept in mind when reading the older books and watching the older films. The life of James Bond is almost a time capsule of sorts. A picture of a world gripped by intrigue, eager for adventure and the seemingly glamorous life of espionage and subterfuge. His world is an escape from ours of the time, a chance to flee from the threats of nuclear annihilation, from the dour and depressing life of a wounded and slowly rebuilding England, and to experience that old imperial strength once more, an element perhaps enhanced by M's office, usually containing paintings of famous British naval victories. While the literary Bond would actually be quite popular, if somewhat controversial for what was once deemed a mix of sex, sadism and snobbery, it was when things were cleaned up a bit for the silver screen that Bond truly became an icon. Interestingly enough, the cinematic franchise kicked off on the same day the Beatles released their first single, October 5th, 1962. And of course, when we next discuss James Bond himself, we shall learn of the men who wore the black tuxedo on screen. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Yes! Under 2 minutes! Okay. After 2 hours of work, basically, we got there. I have earned it legit. I've earned a little bit of cred today. We are gonna Boris it up in here. We are invincible. I'll switch on paintball mode as well. So, let's go back into the facility. And I'll show off a little something. Now, you might have noticed in Secret Agent that I wound up actually showing off that you can replicate a scene in the movie. I think I got myself shot trying to do it. Now, I will just stand here and slap people. I am completely invincible. Bring in all your guards, I am invincible. I am really happy I got this. It was so frustrating. Sometimes I'd try and press the buttons only to wind up reloading, or it didn't register. And you have to be very specific. Everything has to go just right. But I cleared it under 2 minutes. That's a heck of an effort. I'm pretty impressed with that. Hopefully we had some good time to actually give the lesson too. There's probably going to be a lot involved in that. But hopefully there was a bit of education, and we'll be able to show off exactly what I wanted to do right at the end of this. Because, well, it's going to be fairly important. Or at least for a bit of fun anyway. So will I. So we need to activate that. No body armor, of course. You will forgive me if I'm a little bit short on things to say, because I have to go back and activate that again. Oh well. I've got time. I can just stand here and take shots and it's no big deal. At least the computer didn't blow up, because if that computer goes, you're screwed. Oh boy. It's been a heck of a job. But yeah, I haven't really got much to say because, well, it's just that sort of, well, I'm a bit exhausted, I'm a bit drained, but we did the job. We finished the job, James. And I can be really proud of that one. The next one is, well, it's fairly easy as a matter of fact. More than likely, I'm actually going to get the cheat just playing the mission normally, because it's runway on agent and it takes you, well, 5 minutes is the target time, and it will take you a lot less than 5 minutes. Oh, hello. It's a cool touch that you can paint the guards' helmets. But yeah, runway on agent, that's where you get the next cheat. I'll have to count how many times I screwed this up. Or I had to try again, because this is a phenomenal cheat. Like, invincibility is so hard to get. It's like when you get it, you know you've earned it, because you not only need some damn good skill, but you need the luck. You need that little bit of luck. Dr. Doak has to be in the right spot. Sometimes where Trevelyan is. Trevelyan was right at the bottom of the stairs when I got that cheat. So I was able to start talking to him, put the mines in the right spot. One time I had a great run, but I just managed to muck up where I put the mines. One time I actually did the mission, but it was just too short. I mean, I was 7 seconds off. Like, there is a lot that has to go right, but it's the prestige. You've earned this. And I just feel so happy that I've got just that little bit of extra credibility. I'm still a terrible shot. I'm still a graduate from Stormtrooper School. But I did this on my own. I didn't use save states. I didn't use one of the push button codes you can get for invincibility. You can actually do that. There are little push button codes that you can input, which will grant you invincibility, invisibility, a couple of other things. It's really cool. It's actually pretty impressive, and sometimes having that invincibility and invisibility really helps. Also, there's an interesting note about the guard's AI. If they have a direct line to you, is this the guy? Yeah, you probably would have seen me get the clearance A key card. I think it was in the agent run. That's not used. You don't actually need that for anything. It might have been in cut content. But yeah, the guards have got really cool little idle animations. Here is the good doctor again. And I'll demonstrate what I wanted to. Because I made the mistake of firing at the guards the first time I tried to demonstrate this little cheat. And, well, they started shooting. But yeah, you will recreate the scene from the movie. But Oromov will just start firing on you, as opposed to the movie where he refuses to have his troops fire on Bond because basically the gas tanks could get blown up. He winds up shooting one of his men as well because they try to fire on Bond. That's the interesting thing. He shot Trevelyan. Though in fairness, it's probably a blank. Did he have a blank loaded in his gun and then just had regular bullets, or were there different pistols? There we go. Now let's not detonate the tanks because that will make Oromov's men shoot at us. Let's get out our silenced PP7. So, I mean, it's too easy when you've got invincibility. Half of everything is luck. Once this cutscene goes off, you can actually detonate the remote mines and kill Trevelyan. The game won't complain. If you shoot him beforehand, then he will complain about the Golden Boy being a traitor and open fire on you. So, if we wait, Trevelyan will actually kill some of these guys. But we can see, basically again, we're supposed to be planting the mines at this point. Trevelyan drops his gun. And Oromov will do his countdown. But if we detonate the mines, so the room is starting to fill with poisonous gas. Oromov will run. If you actually have the gold PP7, it is possible to kill him at certain points, but that's for later. Note that the guards will start respawning infinitely. The gas will fill the room, but we aren't harmed. The guards will eventually start taking damage, but the poison gas doesn't affect them very much. So the room will wind up getting clouded. We can also wind up going up this way. And we note that in here there are 2 guards. We normally do not deal with them, but I believe it's an acknowledgement of a bit in the movie where Trevelyan sees this door opening as the alarm goes off, and he shoots the guards that come out from there. So, but if we go over this way, we can actually get to a room that has another guard. There is a guard. Normally there is a guard in this room. At least I think there is. We're not sure what this area is here for, but if you do bring in a sniper rifle or something, you can shoot Trevelyan from there and you'll be fine. But there we are. Everything's got a lovely green glow. We can go out this little pathway, like you would in the movie. So let's do that. There we go. So that basically demonstrates invincibility. You are invincible. Best time 1:56. So the next time we will be at the runway. We will be completing that and we'll wrap things up here. Thank you very much for joining me. Till next time, this is Red 2, returning to base.